Awesome. Welcome to this episode. We're here with Dewey Rosetti. If you don't know Dewey, she helped found the Parents Education Network, which is now part of the Children's Health Council based in Palo Alto. Their role in educating parents and teachers on the latest and most effective methods for helping children and students was, I would say very revolutionary and also extremely on the forefront. We're going to learn more about that. We're going to learn more about her experience as an advocate over the years, 25 years of working on individual learning techniques. She's also partnered with Harvard professor Todd Rose, who is also a best-selling author. He brought his research, revolutionary research, to the science of individuality to helping children and parents who learn differently. And we'll ask Dewey about that today. Dewey has a brand new book out. It's a wonderful book. It's a combination of her story, the background as to how she got to being an advocate, and also some very important advice and helpful guidance for parents who are just kind of waking up to this or understanding what it is to have a child with LD. My wife and I are both advocates, and we talk about the look on people's face. And we typically recommend books, and this will definitely be on our list of books to recommend to parents. Dewey, welcome today. We're excited to have you. Yeah.
Thank you.
At the beginning of the book, and we talked about this last night at dinner, actually, the story of your daughter and the drawing at school. Can you tell us that story real quickly? Because I
Oh,
think
that
it's
is a very painful story. It's a good thing it's way behind us in the past. My daughter we had put her into a school that we didn't select for her. It was a private girls' school. It was in our neighborhood. And my older daughter was there. And we loved the school. And we just thought, like you did in the old days, we'll put her where her sister is. Why not? And the second week this is a kid who was a very athletic kid, even when she was small, and very expressive, a really cute kid. And she was very empowered as a little child. And she was king of the playground when she was in preschool. And she hit the second week of kindergarten, and she said, "I can't sound it out." She came home sobbing. And I, of course, if it were now, I'd snatch her out of the school, because she basically could have said to me, "I'm dyslexic." She just didn't know the word.
yeah.
But in any event, fast forward 4 years, because the school kept saying, "We can help her, we can help her." But they really didn't recognize dyslexia and the kinds of different teaching that you had to do for teaching a dyslexic kid how to read. So, oh God, I hate this story in a way, but in any event, 4 years later, I got a phone call from the school, and they said, "You need to come up here right now." Very somber voice. And I said, "Oh my gosh, is she hurt?" And they said, "No, she's not hurt, but you need to get here right away." So I went in, and they had put me in a little closet. I mean, the school had been extremely helpful with my first child and very helpful with this child. So I wasn't, we were on wonderful terms, because they really helped me understand some of the stuff, but they just didn't know what else to do. And so for 4 years, my child was there and didn't read. I couldn't read. And her way of telling me she had had enough of not being able to read, with all these little girls who were running around talking about Harry Potter at the time. I walked into this little closet, and they kind of sequestered me in here and handed me a picture where this child, who was the most sensitive, sweetest child you've ever met, in her old self, had drawn a picture of the school with the initials on it, believe it or not. So there was no mistaking what she was doing. And a little picture of herself with blonde hair, blue eyes, with a big match, right to touching the building. And they, of course, thought she was going to be the Unabomber.
Right.
And they called me because they wanted to say she's angry and she could lash out. And so for me, it was that I had failed her. And the pain was horrible at the time. I mean, of course, I never even told her I saw the picture. I just got her out of that school as fast as I could and got her into a wonderful place where they did teach her how to read.
That's right.
So you wrote experiencing the loss of the idea of the perfect child. can cause pain and paralysis. A learning disability diagnosis is not a death sentence, far from it. What does that mean?
Well, I think all of us, when we're waiting for children to be born, or even in their first few years, we see, like our child, we thought she would be an Olympic athlete. I mean, my husband did. I wasn't really tuned in the way he was, but he kept saying she's in the top 0.5% when she was 2 for athletics. And you get these images, it's stupid. I mean, looking at my little grandchild now, it's just ridiculous, but I think we all do it, let's be honest. Sure. And we say, oh, she's going to be, or he's going to be. And look at all the skills he has. He can be an architect because he has fine motor, whatever. And as soon as somebody says to you, and I love Stu saying, he and Mary say, it's the look. It's deer in the headlights, right, Stu? Mm-hmm. It is, what? She can't, what? And you really do get paralyzed, I think. Well, I mean, I think most people agree who study the field that you really do go through a grieving process. And, there's 6 stages to grieving, and the denial first, and the anger, and but you really get paralyzed at some point because you don't know what to do next when you get this news. And most people, now, I don't think it's actually changed that much. Stu, you guys maybe know more than I do about this, but I was 25 years ago doing this with my kids and talking to the schools, and they weren't as well informed as you would think they should be. And it's because it just, it's 80, 70, probably more than 80%, or it's 30%, I think. They say 1 in 5 kids have learning differences, but I think it's higher. Anecdotally, it's higher, I think. And the population around me, of course, is a much bigger number because I kind of am a magnet now for talking to parents because of the organization that we started to help parents. But in any event, when that image is broken, shattered, because my child can't read, what is he going to, he's doomed. He can't be successful. And the case of Melissa, my daughter, it was really interesting because she is adopted. My first daughter, my older daughter is biological. Melissa is adopted. And it shouldn't make any difference, and it certainly doesn't to me now. I just am so much wiser now. But I thought, oh my gosh, we got a child who has, a low IQ, which is where you go. You say, she shouldn't be in this school. I love her just the same, but I need to get her into, whatever. And that's what stops you, is you don't know what to do next. And in my situation, my older daughter was lagged a bit, but then she now has a PhD. She was fine in that school, but she was behind the girls a little bit to start with. She was slower to develop her skills. Melissa got angry. She just got angry, and
talk about that. It's you wrote the self-esteem is like brittle candy that can crack at any moment, and that really touched me. And it, based on that, not being able to read is really the worst of it.
What's the key?
Yeah,
it's the key, right? It unlocks all the other grades and all the other subjects. So if you can't read, and it goes way beyond the playground. I mean, she would go out to be the king of the mountain, the queen of the mountain on the playground because she was so athletic. And then they would start to write, in chalk on the playground, on the asphalt. And they would, write numbers and letters. And then she was, it goes outside. Now I'm behind again. So she was behind everywhere. Then when they started, these little girls are starting to read it for you. We had a little girl who was her best friend who used to read the side of the milk carton when she was 4 and say fructose and, whatever. And my poor little Melissa was sitting there, and my husband and I were wide-eyed. Well, we can't let her do this anymore. So you're behind in everything if you can't read.
Yeah.
It starts you off as a failure, which is just a disaster for self-esteem.
Yep.
That's such a young age, too.
Yes. I mean, it's your first thought of yourself, oh, I can't do what everyone else does. And of course it affects you. And I just don't think there's enough understanding of how devastating that is to a child. And it doesn't matter how old they are. When they're different, if they're 3 years old, they know, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can you tell us about Charles Armstrong School and why is that so important to, or why was it, so important to you and your family?
Well, by the time we stayed 4 years in a school where my daughter really honestly changed her personality almost completely, and became so angry and tortured, and her self-esteem was below the ground. When you get to a place where people understand and give you the words, when I called the Charles Armstrong School to see if I could get her in there, the woman was so wonderful on the phone and said, does your daughter do this? Does your daughter do that? Does she look at a word and you tell her what it is, and then 3 sentences later she doesn't recognize the word? Yes, dyslexia is what that is called. That, to me, was a relief. We have a child who's, you could tell she was a very bright kid and very active and very accomplished and very self-confident until we left her 4 years in this school. So you get down to Charles Armstrong School and the whole place is geared, it's very child-centered, and it's all geared to building back self-esteem. And they know how to do it because I would say all of the kids, because it started, I don't know where they start now, but I think they started then in 2nd grade or maybe 1st, but it was beyond kindergarten. So all the students had failed someplace and been sent away from whatever school they were in because they couldn't get served there and learn how to read. So you got down there, and honestly, it was like an oasis for both of us. For my daughter, who felt like she was, again, competitive with everyone because everyone is in the same boat, and they were all learning at the same pace and learning the same things. I shouldn't say at the same pace, but learning the same things because they language arts was their problem. And they just did a wonderful job of building back self-esteem and helping the parents understand. And so I just threw myself into it. I loved it because I was like a sponge back then. I was so wanting to understand what this was. I had heard the word dyslexic. I thought it was switching letters, something very simplistic. I didn't get it because it didn't affect my family at the time. Before Caroline and before Melissa. And so, I'm down there, and then I got very interested in talking to the faculty, and I went to a lot of conferences with them. And I got turned on to just getting all these wonderful speakers, which is what gave birth to Penn. Mm-hmm. Because when we did, all the parents were educated by the time they left Charles Armstrong. And then we looked at each other and said, what is life after Charles Armstrong going to be like? Right. Where we're getting supported. Yeah.
That community. Tell me about that. That was the genesis of, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
That was the genesis. Yeah. Exactly, because when Melissa was ready to graduate, and she stayed 5 years, and she really, one of the teachers came up and said she's like a butterfly. She's just blossomed in these 5 years, which she had. I mean, it was beautiful to see. And she got the big award at the end because she was thrilled to be able to, learn again. And she became herself, and it was beautiful. That graduation, there wasn't a dry eye in my family. But we got out, and I thought, my older daughter was then struggling a little bit because of processing speed in high school. And the high school was not geared. Schools they weren't getting it at that point, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, really. And so I got this brainstorm one day because I had a whole team of people helping me, psychologists and so forth, that I had built up over the years with Melissa and my older daughter. So I called one of them and I said, we really need to do something for parents outside of this wonderful school where I was. Would you join me? And the first person was so enthusiastic, and she's a psychiatrist. And then I called a learning specialist that had tested my kids, and I said the same thing. And she said, "Oh, I'll bring friends." So we had that first meeting in my living room, and around that table. And that
And
table.
that was before the one thing you told me over and over again was this was pre-internet, right? And these people didn't
Oh,
really have
yes.
a chance to share information, or there was
No.
no
And they won't
IDs, and there
even,
was.
these principals, it was interesting because we had five heads of school, I think. And then we had several psychiatrists or psychologists. We had all kinds of disciplines in the room,
Mhm.
teachers, fewer teachers than anything, because we were trying to get at the administrative level
Right.
of, because if the head of the school isn't on board, you can't get the teachers to be on board with changing the way they teach and being more empathetic to these kids who learn differently, and understanding that you separate intelligence. They're very bright, a lot of them, has nothing to do with the fact that they can't read, and that was so misunderstood. It was kind of shocking.
Hmm.
I think it still is, actually,
Yeah.
somewhat. But in any event, we were so encouraged. I had about 5 parents there who were the original board, and when all the educators left, it was like a little mini conference, and all the people from who were not parents left the room. I mean, we just exploded with excitement, and that's when we started. We started the organization and said, what do we want to do? What do we think the most important thing is? And you remember those meetings, Stu, from when you were on the board with us. It was so much fun because we did so much problem solving.
Mhm.
And we had this whole group of big names in the city, heads of school and so forth, who believed in us. The worst part was, at the end of this, I stood up in front of all of them and thanked them for coming. And I said, "So what are you going to do now?" And they said, "We're not going to do anything."
Call to action. Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, "Oh my gosh, what did I do wrong here?" I thought we were giving them some inspiration and we would be advisors, but of course it was the opposite. They
Yeah.
advised.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, Parents Education Network was a national nonprofit. There were chapters in several states, and every year, for several years, a very large conference was held in the AT&T, or I think it's now called the Oracle, baseball
Yes.
stadium in San Francisco, where the Giants play. And thousands of people come from all over the United States and even a few countries, and we're able to coalesce and participate in both speaking events, workshops, labs, art displays. It was quite wonderful. We'll put a link in the end of this show so you can see some pictures from past events.
Well, and it's the important thing is Children's Health Council really kept that intact as best they could, and they did the 2 years that they shepherded and absorbed it into their organization. They have put that on, and they copied this. I mean, they replicated it.
Yep.
Now, because of the coronavirus, they weren't able to do the event this year. So it will come back in a different form, but I'm pretty sure they will continue with it, because you have to. I mean, Stu, you remember it was inspirational to watch. What we said to each other when we planned that is, conferences take so much volunteer work, and you get a maximum of 300 parents. And it's just not, is it worth it? You're constantly saying, is it worth it? And you bring in speakers and they're expensive, and, only 300 people. So we said, what if we did something? The most important thing we did, and that was the most popular, was having the kids talk about themselves. And they were so poised and articulate and not angry. They were remarkable spokespeople. Pardon me. And I'm sorry. And so we said, let's do something by the kids. Let's have the kids do something. Well, they're teenagers, so you can't exactly throw it into their hands. But we asked them what they would like to do, and they wanted to have a big festival of some sort. So what came out of that is this event. And we said, but where can we have it? I mean, who wants to go to a school on Saturday? And we thought of the ballpark. And honestly, it just grew to be so wonderful. And the first one, we had 1,200 people. We said 4 times the number of people we'd ever had at anything else. So we said we were onto something, and we had every kind of, it was, and even later it became 2 days. And the kids had their own day where they got very empowered and got to know each other, and they told their stories. And then they got up at the event, and they had a big part to play at the event. And it was so empowering. I would say it was transformational for parents and for kids.
Yeah. Small side story. I was working at Microsoft at the time, and I had invited some folks from Microsoft to participate, and they were setting up their booth. And Microsoft, as it relates to trade shows and booths, usually sends the interns or the new guys, the fresh out of college kids.
Mm-hmm.
So these are kids from, Cornell and Harvard, and, they're working their way through the ranks, and they were setting up across from the youth group meetings where they were doing the testimonies about their own experiences. And they came to me afterwards, and they were practically in tears. They were like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea what these kids have to go through." It was, it was funny and poignant and heartfelt at the same time. So
I haven't heard that story before.
Yeah. It was hilarious because they're Harvard kids or Cornell kids. They can get through anything, and then they see these kids who are challenged and struggling. And
and the thing that was so remarkable was the kids were so articulate about it. Yeah. They did so well discussing, talking about what they needed and what they wanted, their dreams. It was great.
Right.
Would you mind sharing us your journey with ADD and some suggestions of how you manage it?
Well, I'll just I have to start because with when I really found out. I was in my 50s, and I was working, and I became a conference crawler, is what the expression that was used in the book. I just couldn't get enough information when I really started, finding out about this whole thing that I knew nothing about, and all these people were involved in. So I found myself at a conference, and I was looking for things on dyslexia. ADHD was not in my scope. My older daughter actually has ADHD, but she has the inattentive type, and she was able to cope with that because we had strategies for her, but mine is very different, I found out. But what happened is that I got in the wrong they have these side conferences, breakout sessions, and I got in the wrong one. I walked in and sat down, and I looked up, and the speaker was not the person I was looking for. And I started to get up, and in fact, she has become a friend now. Her name is Chris Dendy, and she is a PhD in psychology that she did after having her 2 boys who both had ADHD. And she and her husband had to come to grips with that, but now she's become a scholar on the subject. But she put a simple list on the board, and it caught my attention in a way that was just odd. I looked at it, and every single thing she said, you might have a kid who has this might have difficulty with taking notes from the board, finishing an assignment, procrastination, lack of organization, to name a few. And I just plopped down in the chair again. I started to leave, and I sat down. I thought, oh my God, what is this that I know nothing about? It just described me in college, described me. And what I had already done at that advanced age is I never worked by myself on anything. I used to start things, and I did a lot at the girls' schools, and I did a lot before that, but I never worked by myself. And I realized why. I'm a team worker. I love to start things, but I don't have the skills, the organizational skills and the executive function skills, nor do I have any interest in them, is the big problem. And I don't want to concentrate on doing that when I like to do this other part. And so it was a very natural thing for me, even at Levi's. My reviews used to say, well, she gets a team behind her, and nobody works here as a team because it's kind of a cutthroat. Retail is a very cutthroat kind of business. I mean, and everyone was fighting for production and stuff, but I was a team person. And they all kept saying, well, why is everyone being so nice to each other now? Because we needed each other's skills. I mean, that's the way I work. And I always work that way. But I did that naturally. I didn't do it because I knew. And now, of course, I know why I did it. And I think that's the best kind of thing when you find out. I mean, I think it's great that I didn't even have a label for it. It was a relief when I did, because then I said, oh, well, I might have gone a lot further if I'd been diagnosed and treated properly. But you know, it's not embarrassing to me. And the fun thing about Penn was that we were able to joke about all those things, and they would say, "Oh, don't give that to Dewey. She's not going to do that."
Well, you told the story in your book. You said you took a job that probably was the antithesis of being
McKinsey.
Oh, as a McKinsey, and you were a librarian, and you're like, what
I was
am
a librarian, which, first of all, is the biggest joke of the world. To sit, and I had a little desk that was out in the middle of this library that they had, this business library, and everyone who walked by, of course, I chatted with, and they chatted with me, and it was awful. I can't even look back, and I was there 4 years, and it was really 3 years too long.
But then you said you found the job at Levi that was a perfect fit, because it was collaboration, it was creative, it was
all of it, and it was it was a lot of people stuff and team building, and you had to build teams with the manufacturers, because you were fighting for factory space, and you were these good old boys down in the South who had who ran these factories, it was fun. It was really fun, and I did find it. But I happened into it. It's nice to know now, because I can. I mean, my dad used to say to me, and I never understood it. He used to say, "Dew, you're not going to be one of those people who can sit behind a desk." And I just nodded. He must have, I don't know.
You had a desk, but you had to get up and move around. You had to do stuff. You had to talk to people.
I couldn't sit and work by myself.
So one of the Penn events we had as one of the Ed Rev events that we had our current governor, who was at the time, Gavin Newsom, and
he was the lieutenant governor, wasn't he?
Oh, that's right. He was lieutenant governor, and he said something that you put in your book that I just absolutely love, and I'm not sure if it's exactly attributed to him, but maybe somebody else. But failing is each person's way of learning what they are good at and enjoy. Why is that important? And based on the story you just told us about Levi's, why is this so important to fail and then learn from that?
Well, he surprised me, because that was like the fourth time I had asked him to speak. We asked him to speak when I was at Charles Armstrong, and I don't remember who knew him. I don't think it was me. I think somebody else knew him first. And can you see me? My internet there. Anyway, Gavin Newsom, and when he was the mayor of San Francisco before that, and he came and talked to the kids, to a classroom of kids at Armstrong, and I was I was his hostess. I don't remember, but I met him, and we talked. My husband and I talked. Oh, I think my husband got him for us. And anyway, that was his mantra with these kids. And he was wonderful with the kids. He would get it. He was a tall guy. He would get in the little desk and sit down eye to eye, and they were all asking him to write his autograph. And he connected with them because he told them all of his strategies. And he said, I can't tell you how many times I failed, but look who I am now. And this is what you can do. And it just struck me. I mean, it gave you chills, because he was so down to earth with these kids. And they were so excited when he left, because he said, don't squash your dreams. Look at who I am. And I didn't start out like this. So failure is how you learn. And that's what he told them. He said, that's how you learn, and you have to kind of keep trying things and see what works for you.
Yeah.
And obviously politics for him.
Yeah. I got to talk to him a little bit, and we talked about strategies, and being a public official, you have to do a lot of speaking and memorization of facts. And he said that he used a highlighter, and he would go through every printed thing that he had to discuss or learn or talk about and highlight the items that he wanted to make sure he remembered. And then he would go back through them. And he said, you'll see pictures of me in my office, and there's thousands of binders behind me. Those are binders with highlighted text so that I can go back and refer or remember. So
the facts, because he did, if he gives a speech, I watched him doing this on television over the COVID thing, giving his updates every day. And I said, this is so funny to talk about him now, because I said to my husband, I've watched him prepare for speeches in his office. And I can tell you how many hours he spent trying to get this down, because he has to memorize it. He can't have a teleprompter because it makes him too slow, and he gets unsure of himself. So he needs to really work at it. And what he told the kids is he has these little index cards, and he puts them in his pocket, and then he just jots a word and then hands it to somebody when he gets back in his office and says, write this up, and then he highlights it. I mean, he was wonderful, because he really is so honest about what it took for him to get to where he is.
Yeah.
A few public officials,
Yes.
in such a way.
Yes.
Can you tell us about Todd Rose? How did you meet, and then why are you working with him today?
Oh, Todd Rose is another one of these young guys. And, he dropped out. I heard about Todd Rose from a professor from the University of Utah. And he came, we hired speakers every year to do events. Like I said, those conferences that attracted only 300 people in the early days of Penn. And this guy talked about this guy in Utah who he was one of his patients. And it was Todd Rose. And at the time, I think he was 20 something. And he told us the story. He said this kid was a nuisance. He dropped out of school at 19. He blah, blah, blah. And now he's at Harvard. But ADHD was his issue. And he was in a very small town in Utah. And he just painted this little picture. And then years later, pretend that was like in 2006 or 7. And then in 2012, somebody mentioned that he was at Harvard, and now he's speaking about his early days of no success. And now he's a professor at Harvard. And so I called him up and said, we'd really like to, your story is perfect for us. Come and talk to us. And so then we had board meetings where I think this was before your time on the boards too. And it was just so enlightening, because all that he said, we had all found our coping mechanisms and figured out what was best just intuitively for our kids. And all of us who started Penn had gotten our kids to a place, and usually it's around the end of middle school, like 7th or 8th grade, junior high, when they can kind of go off on their own and you can relax, and you have to pull back the scaffolding. And it was just about that time then we were all starting to understand what to do for other people. And when he explained what his theory was about the end of average, and about there is no such thing as an average student, and why are we making all our curricula about an average student, and developmentally that every child moves at the exact same space. He said so he blew it apart with science, the science of the cell and a closed cell. And he explained it to us, and several of us on the board said, this is our next big thing. This takes it out of the victim disabled category. This says, it's scientific. It is, variability is the norm. It is not this little slice of people who aren't like the others and can't read or can't, sit still or whatever the thing is. And he became, for me, it just fell into place. I thought, this is what I needed when in the early days of Penn, when I went around to all the schools and said, let me explain what we know, because they really didn't know. They didn't know what this was, and we had to educate them. learning, neurodiversity, really.
Mm-hmm.
And neurodiversity is the norm. And I didn't have the language. And then when I met Todd, it was like a clink, it fit right in like a jigsaw puzzle. And all of a sudden, I was so simpatico with his thinking that my husband and I helped him start his own nonprofit because he was working. He was just a talent that was hidden, we thought. And I think he was, because he's blossomed since then, and we're still on his board. But he spoke the language we understood. He's moved on. He has a much bigger science of the individual is what he brought out to the public. It was an old science that had been studied by different people over 100 years, but he brought it back out and put 3 concepts to it. And I know you're going to ask me this, so I'm going to jump right in and say, the 3 principles of the science of the individual, or the science of individuality. The most important one, I think, is the jagged profile. And the basis of his science is, or the science he explains as this, is everyone has a jagged profile. So, even these kids who have a 4.6 average because of all their APs and so forth, and they're president of the class and, captain of the hockey team and whatever, those people have things that they're not in their ability set. But of course they kind of shine in this other way, so you don't talk about those, and why would they? And so by the same token, why would you want to go to an employer? I used to say this to parents all the time. In what life does somebody say to an employer, a prospective employer, these are all the things I can't do? I mean, it makes no sense. And so this jagged profile idea gives you a notion of all your strengths and all your challenges. And it's a visual. And I have it in the book. I did it for Melissa so that she could see. And as soon as you can for your kids, I think it's so important to show them where their high edges are and their low edges. And then they can figure out what to do. Like I found out that I, talked a lot and didn't want to sit at a desk and be quiet and do research. It wasn't my thing, but I figured it out on my own. But how fun, how great, and you give them a leg up. If you tell them early on, you can't read, but look at this other stuff. Reading, they all do learn to read, but you're not a fast reader. But you intake information. Like my daughter, who's not a fast reader, is an amazing auditory person. She can recite whole movies,
Well, I remember Todd telling a story at the beginning of his speech about the design of the pilot seat for the fighter pilot.
That's right.
Yeah, and the designers were trying to design a typical average seat. And he said, they had pilots that were 6'4", and they had pilots that were 5'8", and they had pilots that were a little chunky, a little skinny. And the difference is the tolerances when you're flying around, flipping around, shooting things, whatever, can affect your ability to drive that plane, so to speak. And he said that, that was that's a, analogy, but it was, a great kind of entry point to this, that we are all different, right? And we all do things different, and we think differently. Yeah.
And that story he tells still, and for your audience, that's on a YouTube.
Okay. I'll put the link in the, yeah.
You should put a link. There's a 40-minute one, and there's the TED Talk that we got for him, which was maybe a 19-minute one. They're all versions of it, but when he tells that, that's another place where it just clicks into your head. And once you see what he's saying, you cannot go back to this notion that one size fits all, or there's an average something. You really can't, and it's very enlightening. It's like one of those light bulbs over your head. It's an aha thing when he says that. And and that's what gave rise. That's when they did adjustable seats.
Right.
And before that, they were so limited, and it's because some guy questioned it, and he met the guy eventually.
Oh, did he? Oh, that's great.
He met the son of the guy, and the guy came up from an audience of the son and said, "That's my dad." who measured, 2,000 pilots and said there isn't one who's an average. The qualifications that we put down for an average, and then they did the adjustable seats, which is amazing. I mean, that's what came out of that.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, this has been fantastic, Dewey. We're so happy to have you, and it was so wonderful to hear your stories and talk about your journey. And like I said, the book is an amazing two parts. Really, it's that story that we've been telling, but also lots of great advice, case studies, specific things to do and help you. Because the subtitle, the strength-based approach to helping your child thrive and succeed is really what the meat of it is, and I encourage you all to take a look at it. It's available, of course, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's also an Audible book. And
Can
then
I show it?
Yeah,
I have it.
yeah,
Can you
yeah,
see it?
yeah. It's awesome. I love it. I had a good time reading it, and I highlighted it. You'll see some pink highlights in here for me too. So. And do we say the name of the press? It's
it's Prufrock Press is the publisher.
Okay. Oh, I get it. It's Prufrock. Okay,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Now I get it.
Yes. It's just spelled funny, but it's Prufrock.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just got it. So awesome. Thank you so much, and please give our love to your family and say hi to Bill for me and everybody else. And thank you again for doing this. We really appreciate it.
I can't thank you enough. It just started my day off right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Let me
You too, Desiree.
hang on. Let me stop the